My fascination with Foley art is the very thing that brought me to film school in the first place. As a kid, I didn't exactly have the best access to cameras and ways to edit so I could make films myself, but what I did have was celery, shoes, and 2004's The Incredibles on a 2-disc collector's edition DVD set.
People sometimes say that film is a visual medium, but in fact, it really doesn't function without sound.
Sound, I think, is tremendously important to the success of a film. I think that a great deal of how an audience experiences a film is through sound.
Here I learned something that blew my 6.5-year-old mind. Someone's job is to make the sounds that happen in an animated film.
I had to fabricate more new sounds for The Incredibles than any other film I've ever worked on.
And even further, people do this for nearly all films. Sound films, or more colloquially at the time, talkies, were born in 1923. Most of the original films that included sound were featurettes that capped out at roughly 10 minutes, since they were expensive to produce. The first feature-length sound-synced film was The Jazz Singer in 1927. At the same time, there was a rise in radio dramas with an increased production quality that came from one thing: sound effects. The sound of a closing door as someone left or a pre-recorded gunshot in the climactic scene of a radio drama was the pinnacle of entertainment in the early 20s. Since microphone technology was still in its infancy, the mics used in films didn't do a great job of picking up the sounds in a room like pouring water, walking down a hall, or the snaps of a typewriter. So cinema editors began implementing the tools used in radio dramas in the films they cut to make them fuller, lively, and sound more realistic. This is what we now call Foley. Jack Donovan Foley started working at Universal Studios in 1914 during the silent movie era. When Warner Studios released The Jazz Singer, its first film to include sound, Universal knew it needed to stay competitive and called for any employees who had radio experience to come forward. Foley became part of the sound crew that turned Universal's then upcoming quote-unquote silent musical, Showboat, into a full-on musical. Foley and his small crew projected the film on a screen while recording a single track of audio that captured their live sound effects. Their timing had to be perfect so that footsteps and closing doors synchronized with the actors' motions in film. Modern Foley is broken down into 3 groups: feet, cloth and movement, and specifics. Feet is exactly what you think. All the sounds made with feet, steps, scuffs, stomps, are done in this stage. Some Foley artists are specialists in this area, earning them the title Foley Walkers. Cloth and movement is the noises made by shirts, pants, blankets, curtains, or any other, cloth. This might not sound like a lot, but even someone raising their arm has minor cloth sounds that add realism and texture to a scene. Specifics are the really fun part. Technology whirring, bones crunching, lightsabers whooshing, those sounds have to be made somehow. This is where Foley artists get to be really creative, using various props, foods, etc., to make hyper-specific sounds. Some common Foley tricks include: cornstarch in a leather pouch makes the sound of snow crunching. A pair of gloves flapped back and forth sounds like bird wings. A thin stick makes a whooshing sound. An old chair makes a controllable creaking sound. A heavy staple gun and any other small metal sounds can make good gun noises. A metal rake makes the rattle and squeak sound of a chain-link fence. 1/4-inch audio tape balled up sounds like grass or brush when you walk on it. Gelatin and hand soap make great squishing noises. While Foley may be a relatively under-the-radar part of filmmaking, there's a reason why they're credited as Foley artists. The specificity, precision, and experimentation that takes place in a Foley session is sometimes nothing short of miraculous. Using unconventional objects to make sounds for something that feels correct is a deeply imaginative and creative process.
It's a lot of sound, like a lot of things artistic, is very subjective. So I have to make that judgment call.
Here's what the Foley artist from The Incredibles has to say about that.
One of the key scenes in the movie involves these velocipods chasing Dash. None of us knew exactly what the velocipods were going to sound like, but we knew that they had to sound dangerous because that scene doesn't work unless we think that those things are about to chew him up and spit him out any second. The visual design of the velocipods is such that it almost looks like they have knives spinning around them. So I took that metaphor and ran with it a little bit, and we recorded knives being sharpened and sharp pieces of metal rubbing against each other. And one of the key elements, it turns out, in the velocipods is exactly that. It's a modified version of knives being sharpened.
This type of problem solving is what makes Foley artists really earn the title of being artists. It's not as simple as just recording the sounds in person, it's making sounds that don't exist in the world yet. And God, it's just a ton of fun.
To make this sound, they settled on putting a stun gun up to a patch of grapes.
And I've got to make my decision. It's time to be my moment. If this time I ride your, a chance to fulfill my mission.